The jury was sworn in on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the man they were sworn in to judge had been legally erased. Not killed. Not acquitted. Erased, as in, the court determined he had never existed in the first place. Stick with this one, because it only gets stranger from here. The case was simple enough on paper. A man named Daniel Wren stood accused of running a $40 million investment fraud, the kind that wipes out retirement funds and college savings in one clean signature. Hundreds of victims. A prosecutor named Vivian Cho, who had not lost a fraud case in 6 years. An open and shut file, everyone said. Everyone was wrong. The trouble started during jury selection, when the defense attorney, a quiet, unnervingly precise man named Simon Vale, stood up and asked for a continuance. Not to prepare witnesses, not to review evidence. He wanted a continuance because, in his words, he was no longer certain his client existed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Elena Marsh, assumed she'd misheard him. She hadn't. Here's what Vale had found. Daniel Wren's birth certificate was filed in a county that had no matching hospital record for that date. His social security number had been issued to a different name 11 years earlier, then quietly reassigned. His employment history, 2 decades of it, complete with references, dissolved the moment anyone tried to call the companies listed. They didn't just deny knowing him. 2 of them didn't exist either. And then came the fingerprints. When Wren was booked, his prints were run against the federal database as routine procedure. No match. Not no criminal history. No match at all. Not even a birth registry or a passport application. Nothing. A grown man with a face, a voice, a defense attorney, and 0 biometric footprint anywhere on record. Cho stood in front of the judge and said the words nobody in that courtroom wanted to hear out loud. They might be trying a person who didn't exist. Would you believe someone could build an entire adult life, references and all, out of thin air? Judge Marsh didn't dismiss the case. She did something worse for everyone's patience. She ordered the trial to continue, evidence and all, while both sides raced to figure out who exactly was sitting at the defense table. The jury stayed seated. The clock kept running. And Daniel Wren, whoever he was, sat perfectly calm through all of it, hands folded, saying nothing. Cho's team pulled the financial trail first, since money is usually the one thing a fake person can't fake. It has to go somewhere real. The $40 million had moved through 6 shell accounts before landing, oddly, in a set of trusts benefiting the family members of a single company, Voss Capital, a boutique investment firm that had quietly tripled in size over the past decade. Nothing illegal about that on its face. Until Cho noticed the firm's founder, Marcus Voss, had a business partner 15 years back, a partner who had died, a partner named Charles Albee. Albee's death had been a small tragedy at the time. A boating accident off the coast, body never recovered, a memorial service, a headline that faded within a week. Cho almost skipped past it entirely. Then her investigator flagged something odd. Albee's fingerprints, still on file from an old employment background check, were run against Wren's just to close the loop. They matched. Perfectly. A dead man's fingerprints on a living defendant. Sit with that for a second, because that's exactly what the courtroom did, in total silence, for what witnesses later described as an uncomfortably long time. Here's the midpoint turn, and it changes everything you think you know about this case. Charles Albee never drowned. He staged it. 15 years ago, days before the accident, Albee had discovered his partner, Marcus Voss, quietly siphoning client funds and preparing to pin the loss on him. Rather than fight it in court and lose everything to a rigged paper trail, Albee vanished instead, with help. He paid an identity broker, a man who operated only through intermediaries and cash, to erase Charles Albee from every database that mattered and build him a spare life to disappear into. That broker did his job so well that even federal fingerprint systems came back blank. Albee didn't just escape. He ceased to be findable. For over a decade, he lived quietly under a borrowed name, watching from a distance as Marcus Voss built an empire on the very theft that had ended Albee's old life. But quiet isn't the same as satisfied. And revenge, it turns out, ages very well in 15 years of silence. Daniel Wren wasn't a random con man. Wren was Albee's second identity, a costume built specifically to walk back into Voss's world and take it apart from the inside. The $40 million fraud wasn't random theft either. Every dollar of it had been redirected, piece by piece, from Voss Capital's own clients, engineered to eventually collapse the firm and expose Voss publicly, using the exact kind of shell account playbook Voss himself had once used against Albee. It was theft built to look like theft, aimed at the man who'd stolen first. Poetic, in a courtroom disaster kind of way. Would you have seen that coming from a defendant who hadn't said a single word yet? Judge Marsh now had a legal knot. Nobody in that building had ever untangled before. You cannot convict Daniel Wren because Daniel Wren is a name with no birth, no history, no biometric identity, legally a fiction. But you also can't simply convict Charles Albee because Charles Albee is, on every government record still standing, deceased. The prosecution was trying a ghost for crimes committed under an alias that didn't legally exist, wearing fingerprints that belonged to a corpse. Cho actually laughed out loud in open court, then apologized to the bench. Nobody blamed her. The climax came when Marcus Voss himself was called to the stand, not as a witness for the defense, but subpoenaed by Cho once the shell accounts pointed straight back at his firm's founding. Voss tried the composed executive act for about 4 minutes. It didn't survive Cho's second question. Under oath, cornered by 15-year-old wire transfers he thought had been shredded, Voss admitted it. He'd embezzled from the original partnership, framed Albee for it preemptively, and paid to make sure Albee's death looked convincing enough that no one would ever go looking for a survivor. He hadn't hired the identity broker directly. He'd been introduced to him by a mutual associate he trusted completely. A quiet, precise associate who handled paperwork nobody else wanted to touch. The same associate now sitting at the defense table in a sharp gray suit as Daniel Wren's lawyer. Simon Vale hadn't just represented the man who didn't exist. Vale was the one who'd made him not exist. Twice. 15 years earlier, he'd built the erased Albee identity for Voss. For a fee. No questions asked. More recently, when Albee resurfaced wanting a new face to walk back into Voss's life, Vale had built that one too. For a second fee, no questions asked either time. He played architect for both the frame-up and the revenge scheme, for the framer and the framed, for a decade and a half, and never once had to choose a side, because his only real client was the fee itself. And here's the twist, sitting right on top of the twist you thought you'd already had. When Judge Marsh finally ruled, she had no choice but to void the entire proceeding. You cannot try a defendant who is legally a fiction for a crime committed under a fictional name, using the fingerprints of a man the state itself has certified dead. The case collapsed on jurisdiction, not innocence. Charles Albee, technically, remains deceased on paper to this day. Daniel Wren, technically, never existed to begin with. Marcus Voss was indicted separately for the original embezzlement and is currently awaiting his own trial, assuming, this time, that everyone involved can actually prove who he is. And Simon Vale, the one man who built both ghosts, walked out of that courthouse with his bar license intact and his fee already spent, because you cannot prosecute a lawyer for representing a client whose entire existence is itself unprovable in either direction. Nobody in that courtroom got the ending they came for. The victims of the fraud got no conviction, only a paper trail proving where their money went and why. Voss got exposed, but not yet punished. Albee, or Wren, or whoever answers to that face now, walked out a free man wearing a name that legally isn't his, unable to be rearrested under it, and unable to be proven as anyone else either. Would you call that justice? Nobody in that building could decide, and 18 months later, nobody's decided yet. The jury was sworn in on a Tuesday to judge a man who by Thursday had been proven not to exist. But the man who built him, the one who profited quietly from every version of that lie for 15 years straight, was standing in that courtroom the entire time, in a sharp gray suit, taking notes. And he's never once had to prove he existed at all.